Thank you very much, Jos, for those kind introductory words. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to apologize for being late. I don't like people to be late. I was late. I'm in between two parliamentary debates, and then you don't have complete control over your own time. But I'm very happy to be here. This is an important issue. And let me assure you that we are warming up in the Netherlands on the development debate. Let me first thank you for inviting me. We are here today to discuss what I think is an undervalued issue in the public debate, namely the population question. An issue that, in my mind, doesn't get the attention that is required, and I think, therefore, it is very important that SID is organizing this lecture series. In my view, population and the development question cannot be discussed without a little bit touching on history and historical development. I don't want to make it too long. One name which is inseparably linked to population growth is that of course, Thomas Malthus. He is still the elephant in the room, even though Malthus published in his famous essay on the principle of population more than 2 centuries ago. His ideas, I think, are still very influential, though more for some people than for others. Malthus argued that population, when unchecked, increases in geometrical ratio. Subsistence increase only in an arithmetical ratio. A line remembered, I think, by all of us in our school years. Opposing the views of writers like William Godwin, who foresaw a rosy future for humanity, Malthus essentially argued that food production could not keep pace with population growth. That was the famous argument. Policy measures like late marriages, but also famines and other disasters, which in Malthus' view were sent by God, would provide for the limits, the checks on population growth. Now, Malthus was a man of his time, and parts of his treatise, including the passage on human nature, reflected his religious views. He essentially wrote the first economic theory of the poor. But his views on the poor and his arguments against bringing wealth within their reach remain, of course, very controversial. Next, let me make an enormous jump to 1972. Technology in agriculture, but also birth control, had developed in ways that Malthus could not have foreseen. The Club of Rome, a think tank of scientists from various disciplines, published the famous Limits to Growth, a landmark publication that was, to our great peril, neglected. The Club of Rome did not neglect the risks of population growth, but put the issues out of isolation in the context of industrial and food production and the necessary efficient use of natural resources and environmental pollution. They concluded that economic growth could not continue indefinitely because of the limited availability of natural resources, and then particularly oil. Their message, which made a big impression, at least at that time in the Netherlands, was one of urgency and, for some, also imminent doom. So here we are, with a very bad historical overview in November 2009. We're all a lot older, I might add, but are we wiser as well? As we are on the eve of the UNFCCC conference next month in Copenhagen, global warming and global environmental change, including climate change, are the hot topics of this day. Belatedly, I might add, and it has been said many times and rightly, that the Copenhagen summit is the litmus test for our climate policies. Today, and that's the relationship, this planet is inhabited today by some 6.8 billion people. The world's richest 500 million people, some 7% of the world's population, emit about 50% of the world's carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, the poorest 50% are responsible for just 7% of emissions. World population in 2050 range from 7.9 to 9.1 to 10.4 billion people, depending on different scenarios. And as demographers know, that is always complicated. Together with Western patterns of consumption, this is a major reason why it will become increasingly difficult to achieve sustainable development for all. And in order to maintain our current levels of consumption by 2050, we will need not only one globe, but two, an often cited image. But no less alarming for that, and one which vividly illustrates how we are treating the world and maybe population growth today. And the time between now and 2050 is the critical one. After that, consequences of lower fertility might make life easier, but that's after 2050. What does it mean for economic growth? And what does this mean for development? What are the consequences for the poor? The debate around climate population growth, development and consumption touches on many issues, including ethics and equity. Simple population control is not a solution nor feasible. The question is how we balance the right to develop against the right to live in a healthy and safe environment. And what about the rights of future generations? And what is important for politicians, how do we make these intergenerational and in fact interplanetary relationship politically relevant in the consumer society we are, which relates a media democracy to short-termism in markets and politics. As one publication puts it succinctly, consumption versus population. Which is the climate bomb? In this work, scientists conclude that climate change is far more sensitive to consumption patterns than to demographic considerations, since demographic dynamics are subject to greater inertial forces than consumption and production patterns. Tackling consumption not only has sounder ethical foundations, but also greater scope for rapid action. And the poor, what happens to them in that scenario? Don't they risk losing out on all fronts? A new middle class in the world is adding to global effective demand for food, and especially meat. If this demand is not met, prices will further increase, jeopardizing the life chances of the poorest. Belatedly, agricultural investment is now increased and related to expanding work for the poorest. But also here an equity and distribution question should be at the core. Scarcity and growth are in essence social phenomena. That is, I think, the crucial link we are missing so far in the population and environmental debate. The sustainability movement will have to change technology to changing consumption and production patterns. We can build also on some of the more positive population developments. The move to replacement level fertility is one of the most dramatic social changes in Russia and Japan, but also in Brazil, Indonesia, China, and also even in South Asia. But even in Bangladesh, a country I just visited, the rate dropped from 6 to 3 children per woman when the country slowly moves from poor to middle income level. Now, with only a few weeks to go to Copenhagen, population growth and its impact on the environment are receiving, in that context, finally a little bit more attention. And you were already speaking on the cover of The Economist. But it doesn't seem to me that Malthus is back. In my opinion, those of us with a more balanced approach need to take a stand. In that context, population growth well deserves the attention it is getting. And I'm glad to announce on a very practical level that we intend to add the issue of demographic development to the mandate of my Ambassador for Sustainable Development. The Ambassador will look specifically at demographic issues in relation to climate and the environment. Given the width of demography as an issue, and given that sexual and reproductive rights already features strongly in our policy, and I'll come back to that in a minute, I believe it is best to let the Ambassador focus on these already extensive and complicated areas. I'd like to underline that when discussing population growth, it's essential we keep in mind that the developing countries, of course, I would say, as a matter of course, are not to blame for some of our consumption levels. Therefore, they should not pay the price. And let me assure you, it is counterproductive to go to developing countries these days and lecture them on population policy. I think the debate should be respectful and based on facts. At the same time, we should not and cannot close our eyes to what will happen if we continue on our current course. Anyone who has seen the film The Age of Stupid, a frightening picture of the world in 2055, is more than 9 billion people will understand.